Valencia is there. So, Nick, a lot of people turned out earlier today in Miami for the rally, and among them, Trayvon Martin's father. And you spoke with him.
Yeah, hey. Good afternoon, Freddie. Hundreds and hundreds of people showed up here today. The rally took place between about 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. Afterwards, the crowd marched. They thought very briefly about getting on I-95, which is a major freeway that runs through Miami, but that plan changed. They instead went to the police station and ended up coming back here. But while they were here, while they were rallying outside, Trayvon Martin was the headliner. It was a very emotional time for him, very emotional moment as he spoke about his son, saying that he would fight until the day he died to make sure that the legacy of Trayvon Martin was not forgotten. He also said that he would fight for the sons of those in the crowd. I spoke to him exclusively, and he told me that he was very overwhelmed by the support he was given.
It's overwhelming. It just goes to show the love and the support that our families and friends have for us here in Miami as well as across the country. And it sends a message to the nation that we're not going to sit back and let our children be killed and don't say anything about it. I think the people are just tired of senseless violence. And the people really want the world to know that our children's lives matter just as much as their children's lives. And I think that we can't change the stand your ground law, but we can definitely do something to make amendments to it. We admire the president for stepping up and doing that because, you know, it just sends a message to the world that, you know, this could have been anybody's child. And there are no exceptions to whose child it could have been. And we just have to we have to do something to corral the senseless violence. Since the shooting, you know, that's something that you can't never recover from, obviously. Time heals all wounds, but this is something that I don't feel that I can never recover from.
The crowd has now come and gone, but while they were here, the message was very clear. They wanted justice for Trayvon Martin. They wanted the stand your ground law amended or completely retracted. And they also wanted the Department of Justice to intervene in this George Zimmerman verdict. They want civil rights charges filed against the former neighborhood watchman. Fred?
All right, thanks so much, Nick Valencia. Appreciate that. Let's head north now to New York, where Trayvon Martin's mother spoke at a rally taking place there. Alina Cho joining us live now. So, Alina, mostly this demonstration has broken up. Is it over?
Frederica, the headliner of this rally was supposed to be Sabrina Fulton, the mother of Trayvon Martin, and certainly she was here. She did speak, but it was hard to ignore two of the biggest stars on the planet. Jay-Z and Beyonce were also here today to lend their support. They did not deliver any remarks, but certainly they were here, and their presence was felt. In fact, the Reverend Al Sharpton wasted no time. He Instagrammed a photo of himself with Jay-Z, Beyonce, and Sabrina Fulton this afternoon. This rally started at about noon Eastern time, ended about an hour later. It was just one of more than 100 rallies across the country calling for justice for Trayvon. And remember, the timing is key here. These rallies come exactly 1 week after an all-woman Florida jury acquitted George Zimmerman of killing Trayvon Martin. And since then, everyone from Trayvon Martin's family to George Zimmerman's family to the president himself has spoken out. Today, Sabrina Fulton, the mother of Trayvon Martin, said last Saturday when the verdict was handed down, we cried. Today, this Saturday, we march.
He was a child who thought as a child, who acted as a child, who behaved as a child. He had a drinking candy. So not only do I vow to you to do what I can for Trayvon Martin, I promise you I'm going to work hard for your children as well, because it's important.
Sabrina Fulton also urged her fellow marchers to act in a peaceful manner. The president himself said there will be protests, but let there not be violence. Frederica, as you well know, the president said violence would only dishonor what happened to Trayvon Martin and his family. Frederica?
Alina Cho, thanks so much in New York. Let's go to the West Coast now. Dan Simon is in Los Angeles. How many folks turned out there, Dan?
Well, you definitely had several hundred people here, still a few dozen folks behind me. I would certainly also echo what Nick and Alina said in terms of the messages coming out. We heard the same kinds of things here in Los Angeles. As one speaker put it, Trayvon fell, but we rose up. I want you to listen now to how one activist expressed his outrage in the way this case has evolved. Take a look.
There are those who are trying to say that the killing of Trayvon Martin, a young black man with a hoodie, is not about racism. There are those that are trying to say that the profiling and the targeting by George Zimmerman is not about racism. There are those who are trying to say that the verdict to free a killer of Trayvon Martin is not about racism, that the jury follows the law, that it's not about racism, that the stand your ground laws are not about racism. But to those who say that it's not about racism, we say that we're living in a system of racism.
This lasted for about an hour and a half. Organizers and activists had come here to the federal courthouse here in Los Angeles. As I said, it ended, maybe a short time ago, about an hour ago. And I would say that in terms of the messages coming out, again, they really want to press the civil rights charges against George Zimmerman, and hopefully, in their point of view, that will come forward soon. Frederica?
All right, Dan Simon, thanks so much in Los Angeles. Appreciate that. So rallies indeed held all over the nation in other cities, including Washington, D.C., Chicago, Atlanta, and Orlando. Many of the people brought hoodies in honor of Trayvon Martin. The demonstrations were organized by the Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network.
Hello, everyone. I'm Don Lemon. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm in New York today, and you're in the CNN newsroom. In more than 100 cities, this day is set aside for crowds of people to gather, demand justice, and remember one name, Trayvon Martin. Well, some of the rallies are small and muted. Others are larger and louder. This is Atlanta today. People who still can't believe the verdict in the George Zimmerman trial shouted and prayed together. Sanford, Florida now, where Trayvon Martin was killed and where George Zimmerman was acquitted. People carried pictures of the teenager there. And in nearby Orlando and Daytona Beach, they did it as well. And look at this crowd. This is downtown Chicago. They're shouting, "No justice, no peace." Rally leaders in Chicago are joining the call for federal charges against George Zimmerman. I'm in New York, so is CNN's Alina Cho. West Coast, Dan Simon. In Los Angeles, Miami, Nick Valencia. And in the nation's capital, Athena Jones. I'm talking to all those correspondents today in so many cities, but the tone is similar and the demands are the same. So let's take you live now to Miami first, and CNN's Nick Valencia. So Nick, you talked to Trayvon Martin's father just a short time ago. What did he have to say?
It was very emotional, Don, and the scene behind me was much different than it is right now. It was very lively, robust crowd, hundreds of people here today. And as you mentioned, they want, the Department of Justice to take a closer look at the George Zimmerman verdict. They also want the appeal of stand your ground law. But let's get back to Tracy Martin. Tracy Martin took the microphone. He teared up talking about his son, Trayvon. He says it's not going to end. His legacy will not end so long as he's alive. He also said he will fight for the sons of everyone in the crowd. I spoke to him one-on-one, and he talked about how he felt just looking at all the supporters he had here today.
It was overwhelming. It just goes to show the love and the support that our families and friends have for us here in Miami as well as across the country. And it sends a message to the nation that we're not going to sit back and let our children be killed and don't say anything about it.
At the end of the demonstration, Don, some of those that were present here decided to march up and down the streets. Their plan initially was to try to close down I-95, Interstate 95, which is a major thoroughfare that runs through Miami. Those plans changed. They did end up going to the police headquarters only to come back here outside of the courthouse. And when they were here, that message was very clear. Justice for Trayvon Martin. Don?
Nick Valencia, thank you very much. Alina Cho is here in New York. And Alina, tell us what people rallying in New York and the Bronx are demanding today.
Well, Don, I can tell you that at this rally here at One Police Plaza in New York City, the keynote speaker was Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon Martin's mother. But make no mistake, it was hard to ignore two of the biggest stars on the planet who were also on hand to lend their support. We're talking about Beyonce and Jay-Z. The two superstars did not make
on the doors of cars. That happens to me, at least before.
And Sabrina Fulton. Hundreds of people were here on hand today chanting "No justice, no peace." Of course, this is one of more than 100 such protests across the country. Today, Sabrina Fulton called Trayvon a child. She said that he was just carrying a drink and candy and vowed today, Don, that she would work for Trayvon, but said, "I will work for your children as well." Don?
All right, Alina, thank you very much. We want to head now to Washington, D.C. Athena Jones is there. Athena, what did you see today?
Hi, Don. That chant, "No justice, no peace," was also the refrain here outside the federal courthouse in D.C. Hundreds of people showed up for the Justice for Trayvon rally here, braving very high temperatures, some of them even wearing hoodies. Some brought iced tea and Skittles in solidarity with Trayvon Martin. All of them, of course, wanting the Department of Justice to bring federal civil rights charges against George Zimmerman. Now, whether that's going to happen is still an open question, but I can tell you that one of the other big themes we heard a lot about today is the theme of racial profiling. One speaker took issue with a recent column in the Washington Post that argued that people have a right to be afraid of young black men like Trayvon Martin, because black men are perpetrating a majority or a higher proportion of the crimes. Let's listen to what that radio host, Joe Madison, had to say about that.
If that's the case, we ought to be afraid of every white man, because the hard data says that they are serial killers. We ought to be afraid of every white man because they blow up buildings and kill people in movie theaters and high schools.
So pretty strong words there we heard from that radio host. They got a big response from this crowd. We also heard from clergy and from activists like Dick Gregory, the longtime civil rights activist. It was a very spirited but peaceful as well rally here, Don.
All right, thank you very much, Athena Jones. We want to go now to the West Coast and Dan Simon. Dan, we saw violence in L.A. after the verdict last weekend. Most of the rallies were peaceful, but how are protesters treating this call for justice today?
Yeah, hey, Don. Well, really, from coast to coast, all these protests today have been peaceful, and no exception here in Los Angeles. I guess the thing that stood out in my mind, Don, is you really had people of all races and of all ages here in front of the courthouse, the federal courthouse here in Los Angeles. And organizers are glad, or they were glad, that this was a daytime event. They felt like that would really reduce the chances of seeing violence, and that's definitely what we're seeing here today. The crowd has mostly left. Apparently, some folks are now headed to City Hall here in Los Angeles, but I guess I would also echo what all of my other CNN colleagues had to say in terms of the messages and the sentiments coming out of here. People really demanding the same thing, and that's they obviously want to see the Justice Department press this civil rights case against George Zimmerman, and of course time will tell if that in fact happens. Don?
Dan Simon and all my colleagues across the country at these rallies, thank you very much for your reporting today.